I recently shared in another video that I had previously been involved in goddess spirituality, and I put a little introduction on the description of the video. It was a music performance of me playing in 2010, and that's around that time when I was really exploring what goddess spirituality was, and it felt like time to start introducing this topic. And so I might just read out what I had said previously as a way to begin. So I had said in 2010, around that time, spiritually I was experiencing a blend of natural organic and the false light new age. I was getting into goddess spirituality, connected to the movement based in Glastonbury in England. For me, goddess spirituality was so appealing because it seemed to share the values I held dear and that I had found lacking elsewhere, i.e., a deep love and respect for nature, honouring the Great Mother force of life, community and belonging, celebrating natural embodiment, remembering the ancient ways. However, time and experience in that sphere would reveal to me the true workings of the goddess movement, which was very eye-opening indeed. I will share more on this topic as we move forward. And one of our community members, Marion, responded, "I look forward to hearing about your take on the goddess religion. It is intimately connected to nature and its mysticism. I found myself drawn to goddess worship for a time because of that. However, something was off about it, something that pulled me away from myself, and I found it was just another focus outside of myself, like all other religions." To which I responded, almost there, "I agree with you, and overall, it gave me even deeper insights into the machinations of the distorted feminine. It's tricky because it works closely with many of our natural tendencies and desires. I had to go into it to see what it was really about, but thankfully it didn't last very long for me." So there we go. I am now following on from that little bit of conversing there and my introduction to the topic. And as you can hear, it's a bit of a mixed experience, and it definitely is something for me to elaborate on. And because it's been a bit of my journey, I feel like I need to share some of the story of how it even came into my sort of life and awareness in the first place. I could just skip to the end and share the insights that came at the end and then afterwards. But for me personally, I need to go through a bit of the journey and a little bit of the experience of how it got woven into my life. So for me, the terms goddess and awareness of goddess religion actually came into my awareness when I was at university doing theology modules inside a broader humanities degree. And it was in a Christianity module, and you had to pick an essay to do out of a list of questions. And I picked the question, or at least the topic, assess the feminist critique of Christianity. Because I was like, I also hadn't come across like feminist theories either, so I was like, that sounds quite interesting. And because I'd been raised in a Catholic family and had just felt so underrepresented in that religion, if you will. It's so to have something like a women's perspective on quite a distorted patriarchal religion, I was like, okay, that's quite interesting. Let's do that. Let's dive in. So I did, and yeah, that started to pique an interest, like I said, in a sort of women's critical voice on patriarchal religion, because it's a voice that I had in my being, but I hadn't found it outside myself. So I didn't agree with all of it, and it was good to assess the critique, because then you could weigh it up, you know. But I did agree with quite a lot of it. I did. That had an effect. That was one of those moments where it was opened up to a whole other take on what I had previously been experiencing. So that was interesting. What else? That's where the feminist bit on religion first came in. I can't remember the timing exactly, but further down the road in doing those studies, it was a humanities degree I was doing at university. And it came to the time for me to do a dissertation at the end to conclude. And I thought I was going to be writing about yoga. But I was going through the university library. I quite liked the occult and philosophy and theology section. It was way up on the 10th floor of this building. And it had some quite cool books in it, and it had a great view, so I used to just sit up there and dive inward, and dive into the books and dive inward. And I came across a book there by Terence McKenna called The Archaic Revival. I'm just going to get up a wee picture to remind myself. I'll probably put it on the video. So this book came along as a surprise while I was trying to consider and figure out what to write my dissertation on. So it's called The Archaic Revival: Speculations on Psychedelic Mushrooms, the Amazon, Virtual Reality, UFOs, Evolution, Shamanism, the Rebirth of the Goddess, and the End of History. Now there's a title. There's a title for a book. And there it was, The Rebirth of the Goddess. This book really inspired my direction at that point, and it helped to tie things together, and reading that book helped me expand further into the more spiritual side of the goddess movement, rather than the sort of academic feminist side, which I'd found interesting, but really it was the spiritual side that spoke to me more. And so I dived into that, and I ended up writing my dissertation about goddess spirituality, focused mostly on activities in the UK and contemporary Western spirituality, rather than the backstory, if you like. So as part of that research that I did for the dissertation, I learned about the goddess movement in Glastonbury in England, which is one of the few live, active, current goddess movements that has a goddess temple and a culture to it, and a sort of community to it, if you like. So that's where I discovered about them, and I remember when I looked them up online, I was scared. There was a part of me that was like, ooh, I don't know if I want to visit that. But I knew it was really important at the same time. I knew it had sort of an important piece of the puzzle for me, of course, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Pieces of the puzzle, piecing it all together. So a couple of years after finishing that degree, I actually ended up in Glastonbury for a different reason, to do a sound healing course. But it obviously seemed a good moment for me to go and experience the Goddess temple, even though I hadn't really been engaging with the Goddess movement or spirituality much since I graduated. I was like, the story wasn't quite over yet. It had to continue. It had to continue. So I made my first steps into connecting with the place and the people and the energy and the culture and the consciousness of what's going on with the Goddess movement down there. And it spoke to me, battery. It spoke to me more than I thought it would. I felt a genuine heart connection with it in a way that I didn't expect. And so a few months later, we were there again to finish the sound healing course, but it also linked in with their May Day Beltane event. So Wilson was with me too at that point. So we actually got to experience a sort of, it was quite a pagan inspired, earth-centered, inspired celebration in the community. And their version of goddess celebration, of honouring life, and with music and song and food and dancing, and it was uplifting. It was very joyful. We both really enjoyed it at the time, and the community of people, they just felt immediately like friends. I hadn't actually experienced that before, where there was just a level of acceptance and sort of love between people. I just hadn't experienced that before in a spiritual environment, or any environment really. So it was heartening. It was heartening to be involved, and it felt like something was being reclaimed, something natural, something empowering, something healthy, something beautiful, something enriching. Because at the time, I suppose it felt to me like so much of that was missing. It felt like it was a bit of an antidote to the patriarchal version of religion and culture that we live in. It felt like the goddess spirituality was what had been stamped out, and it felt like it was a bit of a solution for our healing and for our wholing as beings and as communities, and restoring our relationship with each other, with ourselves, with the land. It felt hopeful, like it was actually a nurturance, and that it was actually really connecting us back to the mother source of creation, which is what we're really deeply connected to, and we're all deeply longing for it deep down, to feel that connection. And it felt like the goddess movement down there was providing an opportunity for us all to restore that connection, celebrate that connection, and remember the right values and the right morals, and stuff that's like latent in us. It felt like you could express your natural self there, and that it was accepted. That was my general feeling when I first started engaging and being part of the celebrations and activities in the goddess movement. We had put on a festival in Edinburgh, a community festival called the Namaste Roots Foundation Festival. And as part of that, I had set up a space in there called the Goddess Temple. I created in a kind of small room. It was a big, a house, basically a large community centre that was a really old Victorian house in Edinburgh. Really lovely, beautiful garden. It was a good space for a festival. And in one of the small rooms, I set up my version of a goddess temple because I was so inspired by the experiences I'd had in Glastonbury. And I took one of the artist's paintings. I asked her permission if I could enlarge it and put it on the wall in the temple. She said yes. So I might put in a photo of that. And Prime created that space. But it was false light. It was unintegrated. It was imbalanced. It was overly focused on the light, and it wasn't yet integrated with the shadow of the goddess movement, which at that point I hadn't really experienced much of yet. But I was about to. I was about to when I went down for my next experience in Glastonbury. Following that, because I'd had a positive time, I volunteered at the annual Goddess Festival, Glastonbury Goddess Festival 2010. I volunteered to be part of the team to help run and make that happen, and obviously take part and experience what it's all about and be in those energies and just have more experience in that context. And again, a few months later, went down and had that experience in the summer. And I experienced a lot of what I had before. A real friendliness and a sort of natural sisterhood, a natural sense of sisterhood among some of the other women that were there. It was mainly women that were there. There were men. There was maybe a third men and 2/3 women. But because the focus was mostly on the feminine among everyone, it was that really brought us all together. It was our care for that brought us all together. And it was during that experience where it was during the festival where I got to experience the main, maybe there's 5 of them, the main, how would you describe them, priestesses? The main women who run and head the goddess movement in Glastonbury. Kathy Jones being the main one, and a number of others. I think there was 5. I honestly can't quite remember. But I had not experienced them all, and I certainly had not experienced them all together until I was at that event, and they were on the stage, and they were also performing certain rituals with everybody. This is when it got really eye-opening for me, and a little bit like, this is weird. I'm not sure where this is actually coming from. Because among the people, it felt really nice, really, really nice. But then I hadn't experienced the women that were actually leading it, or the main core creators, I suppose prime creators of that movement. And some of their partners, some of their male partners as well. And then it started, getting a little bit different. A little bit different. So, for example, there was one experience in the festival where it was presented as a healing event, and we were in a big hall. It was busy. I mean, there was probably 60, 80 people in the hall, and the main 5 were on the stage. It was just a community hall, but it was pretty big. Main 5 were on the stage. Everybody was just a little bit lower in the hall, and they led a sort of journey which involved everybody. It was like a regressive journey to go back into your either fetal age or just very early age, maybe a baby, and they led everybody to lie down on the ground. I didn't do it because I was just like, I can't do this. So I just sat upright while everybody else lay down on the ground. They just followed every word that they were told without questioning it. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't. So I stayed. I remained in the space and held my integrity. And I obviously had to witness and be part of it and hold true. So they guided everybody to lie down on the ground and curl into the fetal position and start to like moan and groan and basically release latent pain from the womb, from being in the womb, from their mother's womb. And it was the most bizarre experience because all of a sudden it was like everyone was under hypnosis. There was about 60 people around me moaning and groaning on the ground, writhing around, and it was creating the weirdest energetic soup of pain, which clearly those beings were feeding on. The beings on the stage, the people leading the event, the people holding the space for this journey. I could feel like they were deriving pleasure from it. It was really distorted. It was not loving. It was being presented as if it was loving, but it was exploiting people. It was exploiting people's trust and exploiting their love. And it was a horrible experience, really, for me, because I was like witnessing it and I was in it, but I wasn't taking part like that. And so everybody was all around me on the floor, moaning and groaning. Some people started crying, and it was just disgusting. It was a pain fest. And it was the way that it was being predated on that was the worst thing about it. I know we need to collectively heal and be willing to go into our pain and be willing to like transform it and transmute it. I know that. I do that a lot. That in itself is not a bad thing. It's the way the space was held. And it's the way that they were preying on people's vulnerability. Obviously everybody allowed it. They consented. But that was really eye-opening for me in terms of the functionality of that movement and the functionality of how those beings that were claiming to be authority in that space were actually feeding on the attendees and on the people that were participating in the spiritual movement. That was really creepy. And I hadn't experienced anything like that before. And I won't forget that. That was a really amazing experience, which I'm glad I had firsthand. It was like being part of a dark ceremony, dressed up as light and love. That's exactly what it was. It wasn't like that. That's exactly what it was. It was a dark, distorted ceremony, dressed up as being a loving, mother, supportive process. Awful. And there's so much of that goes on in the spiritual communities where people's vulnerabilities get preyed on and predated on. And that really annoys me. That really angers me. Personally, I have a problem with that. And that's partly why I have to talk about this right now, because I've kept this story to myself the whole time, 15 years. I've kept all this to myself. Wilson knows, but I haven't. There's not really been an opportunity to share it. because life certainly went in a few different directions after that. But it's really important for me to share that first-hand experience I've had with that. So I had one other experience of sort of ceremony and ritual in the goddess movement down there, which I found quite eye-opening, and it was kind of a similar topic actually, a similar sort of reenactment process that happened, but it was more elaborate. It was more elaborate, but it was very much about the distorted womb, distorted mother energy that was being presented and worked with. But, well, it was being presented as a loving mother energy, but really it was a distorted feminine mothering energy that was being present, really. And it involved, it was more of a theatrical set that had been set up, and they had recreated birthing channels. They'd created like a set with fabrics, and they had people inside the fabric that you couldn't see. But they'd basically created these birthing channels, and the idea was for you to climb, like crawl through the birthing channel that they'd created to experience a new rebirth, to experience a rebirth as the new you, and to experience a rebirth into this goddess movement as well, kind of leaving behind one life and then birthing yourself into this new environment with this new mother. Really weird. So I did it because I was there to take part. I did it, and I went through this dark like tunnel basically that had been made, and there was people like groping and hands clawing at you the whole way through, and you had to like force your way through. You had to like push through this really like awkward kind of grappling thing to like prove your will to be born anew out into the other side. So they basically recreated a birthing channel, but very distorted one that was full of pain and weird clambering energies, right? And one by one we went through these. There was 2 to get everybody in the group through, and that was one of the weirdest experiences ever. But I did it, and my being laughed the whole way through, and I'm so glad it did. It was a protection thing. It was a spiritual protection thing that just kicked in for me. And my being was laughing all the way through. And I went through and I got squeezed and compressed and like roped on with all these weird hands going through the tunnel. And I came. And I can't remember what happened. I think there was someone there when I came out to the supposed vagina of this recreated distorted construct. I think there was a woman there to kind of give you a blessing or something, and to give you some distorted love or something. I think that was there, but I found it again so surreal, and I was laughing all the way through, and a lot of people were crying. A lot of people were crying and moaning and groaning. It was the same kind of thing, but it was more elaborate and more personalized. And it was very, very bizarre. And everybody would go through that process, and then they would sit and, process whatever came up for them. But I was in this kind of joyful state, because I was like, my being just did that for me, and I'm so glad it did. And I remember the woman sitting next to me, and she was like, oh, you must have had a really joyful birth the first time around, if you're not experiencing processing pain and grief and everything. And I was like, no, that's not what's going on here for me, because everybody was just, it was a pain fest. It was another pain fest, and it was another harvest on behalf of these priestesses or leaders of the goddess movement there. It was so strange. it was another one of those, right, this is way out of whack moments, and that was it for me. After that, I had no more to do with that movement. It had shown me everything I needed to know about those particular machinations and what is really going on there. The women there, those leaders, those spiritual leaders there of that goddess movement are predators. They're not safe. They're in disguise. They're lying. What they present, like any religious leader, is bullshit compared to what is actually going on, which is harvest. Except in that category, it's a female god, a goddess, and it takes our natural desires for connection to the earth, which we always feel, and connection to the mother energy of life. It goes in there, and lots of us have mother wounds. I do. I've struggled a lot with my birth mother in this life. So I was prime pickings for that environment because it spoke to my wounds. And I was yearning for a love that I had never experienced from my own birth mother. That's why I was attracted to the goddess movement, as well as wanting to connect with a larger sense of the Great Mother of creation. And it's confusing in the New Age spiritual movement because the term goddess comes up a lot, and this is another book which I've just started reading again, which, is that going to be backwards? It's Earth by Barbara Marciniak, and it's Palladian Keys to the Living Library. It's a good book, but it has a lot of the New Age terminology in it, and it's confusing because it's blended with truth. It's blended with truth about the feminine essence of creation. But the goddess, calling it the goddess, is the god distortion. It's the god distortion of the natural. And I reread the chapter on this. Galvanization of the goddess is what the chapter is called in here. I'll just read the little intro. Embracing the goddess will open the living library to you and teach you the secrets held deep within the bosom of Mother Earth. For who is Mother Earth if not the goddess herself? That perfectly sums up the obfuscation, the blending of the natural and the false. Because the Earth, planet Earth, is not a goddess. She's a being, she's a natural being, she's a planet, she's a star. The term goddess is really tricky. And so overall, my own experiences of going through the goddess movement was one of, well, inspiration initially, a sense of homecoming, a sense of belonging, a sense like I'd found something that was missing, that was really essential to life. A piece of myself as well. I felt like I was being honoured because the goddess was being honoured. Me as the feminine, I felt seen. I felt respected. I felt like, oh, there's something in my image. There's something I can relate to that might help me on my life path and my spiritual journey. And because I didn't have a good relationship with my own mother in a spiritual way, I was longing for that. I was longing for that connection, longing for that nurturance, and longing for that support. And I thought I found it in the goddess movement in Glastonbury. And what I really found was a cult that predated on people's lack of love, lack of knowledge, lack of integration, that fed on people's wounding, and that used people's love against them, used people's natural love against them, like other religions do. And more so than that though, I really got a first-hand experience of the distorted mother force, the distorted feminine power, the exploitation of feminine power, and the exploitation of nature, the exploitation of the natural love we feel for the mother force of creation. So really cleverly, and also cleverly disguised as somehow connecting to our true roots and to the true missing piece of the puzzle of life. You know? It's so amazing. It's been such an amazing part of my journey to go through that. And I'm very grateful for it. And how else would I know? If that wasn't there for me to go and experience it, how else would I know? You know, because this whole process of spirituality is actually about disambiguating life. It's actually about clearing away the shite and the illusion and the fantasy. That's really what spiritual path is, really. It's maybe getting a wee bit lost here and a wee bit lost there, but ultimately the truth comes out. And it always brings you back to yourself, stronger, clearer, more real, and less willing to be fucked with as well. You become just more consciously aware. You become aware because you've learned and you've gained the wisdom. So I'm glad at this point to be able to talk about this, because I haven't been able to, and I, for one, I don't resent the distorted feminine. It's just so important for us to know it, know what we're dealing with, know how it functions, and to know ourselves, how we get suckered in by it. That's really important. It is there, it is what it is. It's how we relate to it that matters. It's our relationship with it that we need to navigate and become more clear and aware on, so that we can regain our true strength from within and stop looking outside ourselves for the love that we actually have deep inside us, waiting for us to know it, waiting for us to own it, waiting for us to reclaim it. And all these things like the goddess movement, it reflects that possibility and that need back to us. And we'll travel through these things as long as we need to until we get the lessons, like anything. Like anything. So that's what I need to share today about my experiences with the goddess movement. And you may have similar yourself. It would be interesting to hear about yours. But I will leave it here for now. And thank you for listening. Thank you for considering. And this is done with love and done with a genuine care for us all. Because it's a tricky path that we're on, but we can do it. Our hearts are true and our hearts are strong, and we're getting there. Bye for now.